thank you for having me again. I was here a few years ago, and I'm just curious if I could see a show of hands, please. Who may have heard me the last time? Because I'm trying to figure out how much good. So most people have never heard me before. Maybe only 10% have heard me. Nevertheless, I'll still try to keep it short on what I've already said before so that it's not a complete repeat. But just to give you a little bit of history about why I'm here, why I went back into nutrition and dietetics. I'm now 40, I'll be 49 in a couple of months. At the age of 10, I was diagnosed with psoriasis. By the age of 13, I was hospitalized with it. Psoriasis is a systemic inflammatory disease that is manifested primarily on the skin. And although now it's being associated and recognized as inflammation in organs, joints, and the skin also. But I was hospitalized for 2 months at the age of 13. I spent the next 30 years with varying degrees of severe psoriasis. And by the year 2002, it got so bad on my hands that I could no longer open my hands enough to get them around my steering wheel. And the light went off in my head one day when I knew that the next step in my treatment plan was a form of chemotherapy. It's called methotrexate. I've been terrified of this chemotherapy because when you take it for psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease, some types of autism, including still many kinds of cancer, when you take this chemotherapy for psoriasis, you don't get to stop after 8 or 10 rounds like you would be able to stop if you had cancer. You take this chemotherapy indefinitely for psoriasis until a liver biopsy determines that your liver has become so toxic that you can't sustain another dosage of it. So I had been terrified of that path, but when I was getting to the point where I could no longer safely drive a car, that's when I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't, I had to do something else. So I went online, I started looking for other options, and lo and behold, that's when I came across the word diet. Now, by this time, by 2002, I had spent 5 years to become a registered dietitian, and then I'd spent 15 years as a registered dietitian, many of those years as a clinical dietitian in accredited hospitals around the United States. I was pretty annoyed by the fact that I'd dedicated 2 decades to professional dietetics and had never been told that my visible skin disease had anything to do with my diet. But nevertheless, I had actually grown board stiff as a registered dietitian, and I had, despite the fact it took 5 years to get that license, to be a registered dietitian, you have to go to an accredited school, then you have to do an accredited degree, then you have to graduate with honors because it's so competitive to get into a requisite internship. Every one of us out of my undergraduate program at A&M that got into dietetic internships, all of us were pre-med, and we all graduated with honors in the same classes that kids that went on to medical schools. Then you do an internship, and then you take a national board, then you get licensed. And I spent 15 years after that as a registered dietitian, and despite all that, I'd never been told that my visible disease might have anything to do with my skin. By the year 2000, actually, I had grown board stiff as a dietitian. I let my license go thinking that I would never go back into nutrition. So now it's 2002. Is that bad, the sound? Is that better? Yeah? Okay, then I'll just leave it there. So now it's 2002, and I'm looking for something in desperation that I can do besides this chemotherapy. And that's when I came across diet. Now, what I had learned as a registered dietitian was that what was recommended was an extremely healthy diet, so I knew I had nothing to lose by giving it a shot. So I committed myself to a 6-month experiment. July 4th will actually be the 10-year anniversary of when I started that, so it's really exciting, given that it was 30 years of nothing positive. So I started on July 4th. By Christmas, my hands had cleared about 90% without any prescription medications at all. And one of the messages from today compared to 2009 is it's now a 10-year remission without any prescription medications at all. So this is when researchers do clinical research trials, and when medical doctors review clinical research trials for information, one of the important things that they look for is how long was this study done. And 10 years is a significant amount of time to do an experiment. So nevertheless, I went back into nutrition a couple of years later. I spent the next 2 years studying lots of different healing diets, raw foods, acid, alkaline, pH balance, veganism. Now there are even more. And before I went back into dietetics, I approached Whole Foods about teaching in the international headquarters here, and they said, well, you need to be a registered dietitian and teach in our stores. Now they actually don't have anyone with any license whatsoever. But at that time they said you need to be a registered dietitian and teach in our stores. So I said, fine, I'll take the national board, I'll get recertified. And I did that, and now I've been recertified and relicensed as a registered dietitian for the last 7 years again. And since then, whereas before, in the previous 15 years as a dietitian, I was truly bored stiff, never had anybody tell me that I'd helped them in any substantive way, despite working with thousands of patients in hospitals. Now, in the last 7 years, it's been a real, and even in the last 3 years, I get to work with people all over the world that have a whole variety of chronic diseases. And whereas when I wrote my first book 7 years ago, it was already apparent that psoriasis isn't just systemic inflammation. Chronic disease is about systemic inflammation, and that our DNA determines where that inflammation manifests itself. Most specifically in psoriasis, one of the areas that it manifests the most is in the skin. But it's become more and more clear, especially even in the last 3 years since I spoke. Now, whereas when I started 10 years ago, there was no real research on this topic. I had one book that I started with that was really my entire guide. And now there's truly a whole mountain of quality research that's out there, and we'll be talking about some of the places that you can go to look for things. I'm a big believer in getting multiple opinions instead of just taking one person's word at it. So another thing you can do to look at a variety of research sources is to go to my website, which is yourhealingdiet.com. That's yourhealingdiet.com. And I do have cards for anyone that would like a card at the end of the talk. At my website, there's a button that says links, and you can find links to some of the places that I'll mention today. But nevertheless, there's a veritable mountain of real research that's been done now. And been validated in otherwise what's historically been called conventional medicine. I'm thrilled to tell you that when I was here even 3 years ago, there was a chasm between conventional medicine and alternative medicine, and that chasm is I would even say it's gone now, because there's so much research to validate this. It's not erased. There are still plenty of conventional practitioners that practice only conventional practices. However, they can't deny, now that there's so much good research out there, they can't deny the power of these other things to influence our health, and these other things being diet, stress management, sleep, exercise. These things that have otherwise been, in lots of ways, historically common sense and intuitive, are now being validated by lots of real empirical research being done at some of the highest caliber research institutions in the world. So, you know, now it's gone from, it's no longer hippie talk at all. This is real conventional medicine, and I do believe in the next 20 years it will probably be mainstream, because the cost of our health care, regardless of who ultimately, well, you know, whether it's the government or it's individuals, the individuals still pay. And so the cost of our health care continues to explode. We continue to develop chronic diseases at younger and younger ages. And unfortunately, all the demographic trends are that because of our lifestyle choices still, our health care costs will continue to explode. And so it's been a real change completely for me to go from having been bored stiff as a dietitian to now have any part whatsoever in encouraging people to recognize the power they have through their own personal responsibility and their personal choices to take care of their individual health, and then how that transfers and benefits all of us. When we each individually take personal responsibility for our health and we try to prevent, manage, or reverse disease, that ultimately helps all of us. So that said, what I'd like to do this time, okay, let me start with a little tiny bit more about what I spoke of last time. And in fact, 3 years ago, the University of Michigan may not have even had their Healing Foods Pyramid. And by the way, I intentionally don't use PowerPoints because, especially on the topic of health, and you're all in an office environment where you probably see at least one PowerPoint a day. And my guess is most people are so sick of PowerPoints that, and this is a health topic, which is really personal and affects all of us profoundly and on every level of our lives. So I tried to do this very intentionally as a conversation. And I will take questions at the end. A lot of time I'll actually ask up front, do people have specific things that they'd like to ask now? And speak now or forever hold your peace, but I'm going to hold that to the end because of the size of our group. And I also really want to mention, I really want to make sure that I get through some stuff here that has come up in the last 3 years that really bugs me, and I want to make sure that the message is getting out publicly on this. So the University of Michigan, one great place to go look for information is the University of Michigan Healing Foods Pyramid. University of Michigan has a top 10 medical school that graduates medical doctors. This is medical doctors, there's nothing alternative about the licensed medical doctors. This is the most conventional and established license that's been in the United States. And the University of Michigan, in their integrated medicine department, they developed their own Healing Foods Pyramid. If you just type in the word Healing Foods Pyramid, you'll see the link pop up. You can also, again, go to my website and find a link there to take you there. Also, there is, most of us have probably heard of Dr. Wheel. Dr. Wheel has started the Arizona Center for Integrated Medicine. You can actually, as a non-licensed clinician, you can actually go there and take classes in Ayurvedic medicine and things like nutrition and cancer. You can take these same classes that clinicians take for continuing education. And they also, Dr. Wheel has developed his own pyramid, which is virtually the same pyramid as the University of Michigan. However, he's got supplements at the very top of his pyramid. I would be reluctant to mention that because of the things that I'll tell you about supplements and specifically why I don't sell them. However, he is still an established and very credible medical doctor, and he's done a lot of really good work. And so, a second ago I said I'm a big believer in looking at multiple opinions, by looking at University of Michigan, by looking at the Arizona Center for Integrated Medicine. This gives you the opportunity to look at lots of different places instead of just relying on one source for your information. So do that as part of your research. Continue to seek out different opinions and also different resources for quality research. And look for common threads that show up over and over and over again. And you'll find that Dr. Wheel's pyramid is virtually the same as the University of Michigan's pyramid, but for the supplements. The University of Michigan, which is a public, it's a public health institution, it's not an individual with a brand name on supplements. The University of Michigan has no supplements in their pyramid. Other places that are really good for information on diet and disease, Science Daily, BBC News, New York Times is actually coming out with more and more stuff all the time. So there are lots and lots of places now for you to find information. This isn't just my opinion and my experience, this is now validated. There's also Neil Bernard, who founded the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. There's Colin Campbell, who wrote the China study. He's a professor emeritus at Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school, and he did 27 years of research in conjunction with Oxford, both of them amongst the top universities in the world. So, so that said, a second ago, let's see, it was Laura asked me, she said, are you gluten intolerant? Yes, I believe I am gluten intolerant. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about that and the degree to which I think that that can be important in healing. One is that we won't have much time to get into gluten in this class. But gluten is a protein that's found in grains like wheat, primarily in wheat, and it can elicit an inflammatory response in the gut that can ultimately wreak havoc through oneself, throughout the entire body. So she asked me if I'm gluten intolerant. I do believe I am, however, I don't believe that removing the majority of gluten from my diet is why I got the response and the healing that I did. And by the way, my healing wasn't just at my skin. I was on inhalers. I was so allergic to pets that I never had one in my adult life. I was on prescription rosacea medication. I had 1 or 2 sinus infections a year. I had chronic ear infections. I was at the allergy doctor like clockwork for prescription allergy medications. I've been completely free of all prescription medicines except for one antifungal powder for an ear infection that I had after traveling for 2.5 weeks with my mom and eating everything under the sun, and I came back sick. But otherwise, I've been completely prescription free. And not only that, I adopted an 80-pound black lab 7 years ago. I kiss his face 1,000 times a day. I used to be so allergic to pets that even if I went into a home with a pet, I had to pet them with my feet. I couldn't touch them with my hands, because if I did, I'd need my inhaler, my eyes would swell shut. And now I have not only an 80-pound black lab, but I'm fostering another 70-pound black lab from the shelter right now. And I kiss his face all the time too. So, you know, changing my diet did far more than just change what was visible in my skin and my ability to safely drive a car and to be able to cope with psoriasis without any prescription medications. An important point that Dwayne did mention is that, yes, most definitely I've been imperfect with this diet. I've really never done it perfectly. I would say that common sense dictates that if you get big results, that means that not only that you made a big commitment, but that you made a sustained commitment. There is no such thing as short-term commitment and long-term results. I don't believe cures exist. And all this time, despite all the people that I've seen recover from a whole plethora of diagnoses that you can see at my website, no one has been cured. I haven't been cured. The word cure is about marketing. It's not about reality. You know, unfortunately, it's just, in fact, with this group, I thought maybe a good analogy is paying taxes. You know, if you don't pay your taxes, and then you don't pay your taxes year after year after year, guess what? The problem just gets bigger and bigger, right? And by the time you get busted, now you need a lawyer, you might need the police, you got a whole big problem on your hands. But if you just paid your taxes, if you just made the reasonable choices along the way and paid your taxes, then you wouldn't have a gigantic problem and need all these specialists at the end of that line and now have to spend all this money to still find yourself in trouble, which is what happens when we, you know, day by day, when we don't make good health choices, when we choose our food poorly, when we don't exercise, when we allow ourselves to get too stressed out. These things all add up, just like it adds up, you know, when we try to hide. Even if you do pay your taxes to the degree you try to hide, it's going to catch up somewhere. And the same thing happens in our choices with our health. We can't, you know, we can run, but you can't hide. The day will come, the day of reckoning comes for all of us. The difference is that for some of us it comes sooner, some of us it comes later. For me, it came when I was 13 years old. Some people don't get really sick until, you know, much later in life, but I actually developed very serious health problems at a young age, which means that my body was probably fundamentally weaker than some other people's. But nevertheless, back to gluten. I don't believe that taking out the majority of gluten in my diet, I've never taken it out perfectly. Some people need to, but that's a very rare handful of people that need to strictly eliminate all gluten from their diet. Thank goodness I'm not one of those people. If I were one of those people, I wouldn't have gotten any results, but those people are truly a little minuscule fraction of a population. Most people, even if they have gluten issues, they can benefit just by starting. Take out 10%, take out 20%, take out 30%. You don't have to change everything to still get some benefit. So I do think taking out gluten was important, but I don't think it was nearly as important as doing what you see at the University of Michigan Healing Foods Pyramid, what you see at Dr. Will's Pyramid, what you see at the other resources that are listed at my website. The most important thing that I did was to go primarily to a plant-based diet. I'm not a vegetarian, I'm not a vegan, I'm not a vegangelical. But I am a huge believer in the power of a plant-based diet to give our bodies an anti-inflammatory effect. And then equally important with plant-based is that it's got to be whole foods. And by whole foods, that means do you see it in nature or not? If you don't see it in nature, if what you're eating is not straight out of nature, It's not the way human beings have been eating it throughout the entirety of human history up until 100 years ago. Even from a common sense standpoint, plant-based makes sense because how much meat, you know, it wasn't even until after World War II. In fact, it wasn't until public education. The whole world was third world until the advent of public education, you know, except for a tiny handful of people that were part of a monarchy or a church system or something like that. All the rest of us were illiterate. We didn't know the rest of the world until about the 18th century. It was all third world. And guess what? Rice and beans that are still the foundation in many third world countries that have sustained. You know, they're one of the reasons why rice and beans are a staple in third world countries is because it's inexpensive, right? But that's most of us were eating things like rice and beans. It wasn't until after World War II that people had the disposable income to start eating the amount of meat that they could have, that is now seen in, especially in the American diet and Northern European diet. But throughout human history, human beings were eating primarily plants. There were no refrigerators, there were no freezers. So, you know, how much meat were they really having when it cost, just like now it costs more to buy a pound of beef. Well, just the same thing. If you're not going to the grocery store, it costs a lot more to invest in getting this cow to become a cow that you can now harvest and, you know, make into a steak. You got to wait a long time to get a meal out of that. And, you know, again, if you're third world, you're living day to day. You don't have the resources to just keep feeding something. And then if there's no refrigerator, that means, guess what? We're going to kill this thing, and in 2 hours, it's all got to go. So, you know, that people didn't do. They weren't eating a chicken or a goat or a cow for every meal like we eat 2 or 3 times a day. So plant-based is just common sense and consistent with human history. The Paleolithic diet, people will talk about, oh, you should eat so much meat. Well, it's okay, that's just not common sense. And plus, you don't have any empirical research on that for the Paleolithic diet, which brings me to the point, you know, just because you get short-term results doesn't mean you're on the best long-term diet. The best long-term option is to do what our DNA is designed to do, which is to eat the way humans have been eating throughout the entirety of human history, regardless of where they found themselves. If you're an Eskimo, that's one thing. But, you know, not very few of us come from environments where they don't have the weather to grow fruits. And by the way, even Eskimos that have so much meat in their diet, their average lifespan is less than 55 years. Well, who wants to just live 55 years? You know, so nevertheless, the common sense on the best long-term diet, the best way for us to optimize our health and reduce our healthcare expenses is to use the common sense. And the common sense is what have humans been doing throughout the entirety of human history, because that's the way our DNA is programmed to work. Humans not only ate a plant-based diet, and they not only ate things straight from nature. There were no ovens, there were no stoves. They didn't have cars. That means they were walking every day. They were also out in the sun. They weren't underneath hats. They weren't in offices. They weren't watching TV and video games. To the degree that we can actually get our life and our habits more and more in keeping the way our ancestors ate, this is what will optimize our health. The United States now ranks 43rd in the world for longevity. We've been outpaced by some third world countries like Jordan. And those third world countries, people are people that may never go to a doctor, they may never go to a dentist in their entire lives. But they're living longer than we are, and they're probably spending 1/1000th of what we spend on healthcare. But what are these people doing? They're still eating the same diet that their ancestors have eaten. They're still walking. They're still, they don't live sedentary lives. They're out in the sun. They're active. They don't, you know, granted, I don't want to trade places with them. They don't have a mortgage crisis. They don't have the EU isn't falling apart. You know, they're not thinking about these things. But nevertheless, to the degree that we can work on that too, to manage the reality of that stress in our life, that will help to optimize our health. I am a big believer that health is three-pronged. One is diet, the other one is exercise, and the other one is stress management. And you can have a really good diet. There are people that have perfect diets, but they're not in great health. You can be incredibly, I have, some of my clients are Olympic gold medalist athletes, they're personal trainers. You know, they're truly the picture of elite fitness, but they're sick. and they're still competing, and they have serious chronic diseases that I believe are a consequence of the way that they've been eating for years and years to get such a low percentage of body fat, and to get short-term results in performance. This has caught up with them even at young ages. And then stress management, that's something, it's just part of our culture. I don't know that it's ever going to get any better, because it just seems like it's gotten worse and worse for the last 20 years. So, somehow we need to work on figuring this out and how to accept, I guess, something. But we can't just not pay attention to that. That's another thing that we have to make sure we're managing, because stress alone can create very serious diseases. So that said, let me go into some other details of things that I wanted to mention here. Supplements are more and more controversial. Even today, there's a study that came out that encouraged, especially women that are menopausal and postmenopausal, to not take calcium and vitamin D supplements. This is something that that's been popularized for quite a long time. The main thing that I want to say about supplements is that supplements are not part of human history. Supplements have come along in the last 50, 60, 70 years. A lot of times when I've heard people say, oh, you need to take supplements, well, they're selling a supplement. So, there's an obvious, and they say the earth doesn't, there's not enough nutrition left in the soil to provide what it needs. And I haven't needed any supplements to generate the results that I've gotten. When I do private consultations for people, there is typically one, maybe two supplements that I will recommend. I do think, especially to the degree that someone has serious health problems and they're trying to recover, that one or two particular supplements can be particularly useful. But otherwise, the most important, just like, in taxes, it goes back to this. Just like in, putting aside money to pay your taxes, there's no way around it. We might wish there were, but there's no way around it. It's the same thing with our health and our diet. Humans are designed to eat food. Supplements are just popping, between popping a supplement or popping a pill, it's the same thing. We're looking for a quick fix. And short-term commitments don't give long-term results. So we can spend lots and lots and lots of money on supplements and get a short-term result. It's ultimately, I very intentionally do not sell supplements, not only because I believe it's inappropriate for me to make money off of supplements as a clinician, but also because I personally have seen in my own recovery, and in I can't even think of a single patient client that I've had that needed supplements to recover. They needed to change their diet to recover. And that just makes sense, because changing our diet is obviously the harder thing to do. To change our daily choices obviously takes a lot more work. But in doing that, that's where we get the much bigger result. So I'm not anti-supplement, but I do think it's wiser to use common sense and to realize, again, supplements they've not been around throughout the entirety of human history. Supplements are new. And to the degree that things have ongoing revenue streams attached to them, then it's good to be skeptical and ask more questions. I want to tell you why. I list at my website there, I very intentionally, and for good reason, I don't sell product lines, I don't sell packages, I don't sell weight loss product, and I don't sell diagnostic tests. So let me tell you a little bit about the rest of those. I don't sell packages because nobody needs a package for common sense. To the degree that you exercise common sense and you make better choices, you will get better results. Now, is that, the things that sell are the things that make you think, oh, it's going to be easy, and I'll get it quicker, and this person's going to do all the work for me. Well, it's just like saying, I wish you'd pay my taxes. That'd be really nice of you. And if you tell me you will, I might believe that and then pay you, because I like that idea, but the reality is I'm the one that's got to pay my taxes. And I guess my mom could, but nevertheless, that doesn't happen very often, right? She's never paid my taxes. So that said, I don't sell packages because it's the same thing. It's, there is no, again, our health is something that impacts everything in our life, every single aspect of our life. If there's one area of our life that's worthwhile to make a real commitment to, because it will impact literally everything, this is it. And now, especially as a state, as a city, as a state, as a country, where our healthcare expenses are literally drowning all of us. This is something that now is, becoming something that's just unsustainable. To the degree, again, that we each take personal responsibility, we make better and better choices. It not only benefits ourselves, it benefits all of us. I don't sell weight loss programs because isn't it obvious now that weight loss programs are it's a ripoff, right? I used to sell weight loss programs. I won national awards for selling weight loss programs. And now I very intentionally won't sell any of them. These are all things that, how do I say this? Let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Even integrated medicine now in the last 3 years, whereas before you used to have to kind of decide, do you want conventional medicine or do you want alternative medicine? You don't have to make that choice anymore. You can now go to people that have conventional licenses, which means that they're the only ones that have the licenses that will be accepted as qualified in accredited hospitals, which means they've had the experience and the licensing to work with the sickest people. People with alternative licenses, they are not qualified to work in hospitals. But to the degree that you went, historically you had to choose, do you want conventional or do you want alternative? Well, now there are plenty of people with conventional licenses that are also very well trained, licensed, and or experienced in complementary medicine. So my take is, why would you limit yourself to one side of the train track when there are plenty of people now that have the licensing and the accountability? When you go to people outside of conventional medicine, those people are not held accountable. They can make the claims that they want to make. I no longer partner actually with people that don't have a conventional license, because it's not to say that what they're doing doesn't offer any value, but what I've seen too many times is that because they don't have the licenses to work in an accredited hospital, and because they don't have an overseeing organization to hold them accountable to their claims, too many times I've heard them make claims and do things that I don't want my name associated with. So nevertheless, to go back to this, now there are plenty of people with conventional licenses that also have licensing, training, experience, etc., and alternative. However, there are also plenty of these people that are, instead of prescribing prescription medications and potentially drawing income off of that, now there are plenty of these people that are, they'll be happy to send you home with a whole bunch of supplements, and you may not be aware, but they pay their staff a commission. I know that there are people, because I've been sent these job requests, and they pay their staff a commission to sell these supplements and these other things in their offices. So just use common sense. When you're looking for people for care, ask questions. If you say, do you sell supplements? Do you pay your staff a commission on those supplements? Ask those kind of questions. That will help to guide you in terms of what kind of practitioners you actually could hold credible. I don't hold credible the people that pay their staff a commission for selling supplements. So anyway, weight loss programs are, the inconvenient truth is that it gets back to the same thing. We have to start making better diet choices. We have to start exercising. We have to make a commitment to these things to actually achieve sustainable, healthy weight loss. The quick fixes don't work. Although I have to say, it's interesting, the bariatric surgery, in the short term, this is a new thing that's come up even in the last 3 years. There is good research showing how it can be very effective for diabetes. However, we're talking about 3 years, 5 years. That's not a long standing. Nobody knows yet what bariatric surgery will do to people 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years down the line. If somebody takes your stomach out, well, the problem just doesn't go away, It's going to show up in some shape or form, but at this point, that's not been made evident. But again, the common sense is, stomach's there for a reason. Just take it out because it's inconvenient. I believe that there are going to ultimately be very serious health complications from that. Then diagnostic tests. We talked about a little bit about gluten. I could sell all kinds of diagnostic tests and make money off of that too. None of those tests, what I've seen again and again, is that none of them are reliable enough, including biopsies, and biopsies are a surgical procedure where they actually go in and take out a slice of your intestines and then do a test with that. None of these procedures are reliable enough for me to feel like it's an ethical choice for me to sell these things. So the best thing to do is to start where you are. At the first step is really just to start paying attention to what you're eating, then start there and feel good about it. Actually, by the time I finished my term as a clinical dietitian, I went from, the first round was typical, okay, here's your diagnosis now, here's what you're supposed to eat every day for the rest of your life, okay, good luck, bye. And of course, people were really bored with that option. What they liked better was when I started telling them, okay, look, I'm going to give you two versions. One version is the one my boss says I have to give you. The other version is if you drink a 6-pack every night and you take 2 sips less, feel good about it. And keep heading in that direction. And people responded to that. So, it's the same with diet. If you suspect that you have a gluten issue, the first step would be start paying attention to how much wheat is in your diet. Well, if you're American, you probably have a good bit of it in your diet. And then start looking for ways that you can more easily take it out and replace it with whole food, meaning vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. Start doing this. Look at those pyramids I've told you about and start looking for ways to integrate that into your life, not at 100%. Make it a goal. Make 10% a goal. 10% is better than nothing. What happens when we save 10% of our money? This adds up into real retirement money. The same thing with our health. We don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to do, this is why weight loss programs fail. They set people up to think they've got to do something perfectly instead of teaching people, guess what? Cheating is reality. That's what, instead I'll teach you how to cheat better. So just start where you are, be reasonable, don't set goals that are unachievable, and then feel really good about it. And when you're ready to take the next step, then ramp it up. And what you'll probably find is that it wasn't that hard to do. And when you feel good about success, at whatever level it is, then this breeds more success. So start wherever you are and feel good about it. Let's see. Oh, actually, I already talked about that one. So at this point, we have 18 minutes left, and I'll take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any insight on food combinations, like carb together?
Okay, so her question was, do I have any insight on food combinations? Throughout human history, were human beings paying attention to food combination? No. It's, there are all kinds of, you can go out and find, a whole bevy of experts' ideas on what you need to do with your diet. Again, I'll go back to just because if you try food combination, you feel like you're getting results, that doesn't mean that you've landed at the best diet. It means that you probably improve your diet some. It doesn't mean that thing that you're trying, the description of what you're doing is actually the best option. So food combinations, these people in third world countries that are living longer than we are instead of spending a fraction, no, they're not, they don't need a dietitian. They don't need a doctor. They don't need anybody to talk to them about healing diets. These people have just been doing what they've been doing throughout time memoriam. So when you mentioned the wheat, combining wheat, the thing is think about wheat itself. How much, just from common sense again, how much wheat did human beings actually have in their diet if it meant that they had to grow their own grain, then they had to grind it, and then they had to cook it over a fire because ovens and stoves didn't exist either until about 100 years ago. How many of y'all want to cook your bread over a fire? No one raised their hand. So, wheat was not, they say, like I saw something just the other day that said, wheat is the staff of life, and as long as humans have been humans. Well, they referenced 10,000 years. Well, that if you do believe the human history is 10,000 years and you entirely disregard science, then yeah, they've had wheat around for that amount of time. And yes, they had ovens that mass-produced it in certain parts of the world. But there are lots of other resources that will show human history goes back 2 million years. And no, wheat was not a regular part of the human diet. Does that mean wheat is bad for all of us? No. You know, some people have no wheat intolerance. But another thing that I believe is directly associated with why you now see kids that have so many gluten issues, you know, so many allergy issues, is because now the kids' diet is defined almost exclusively by wheat, meat, and cheese. You know, it's pizza, it's hot dogs, it's cereal, it's cheese, cheese sticks, goldfish crackers. These things are not what human beings, you know, historically there was no, kids didn't have kids' food. They ate what adults ate, and they ate the same whole foods that adults were eating. So I think a lot of the problem with gluten is just the extent of it that's in our diet. It doesn't mean gluten is necessarily bad. It's just that it's so out of whack with how much we're designed to eat. Yes, ma'am.
Can you give an example of some of the initial changes that you made in your diet and what you found that helped you the most?
Okay, so I'll rephrase what I said since I did say that. The most important thing that I did was I went to what's described in the University of Michigan Healing Food Pyramid, which is a plant-based whole foods diet. So fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, lentils, and seeds, this became to define the vast bulk of my diet. What I had far, far less of are things that are not whole foods, are bread. Diet soda wouldn't fall in there anywhere. I've had swimming pools full of Diet Coke in my lifetime. I also drank alcohol. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up in the sense. Although at the University of Michigan Healing Foods Pyramid, at the very top of that pyramid is alcohol and chocolate. And the good news is now raw chocolate. If you get raw chocolate, it's a bean, which means it actually it's closer to the base, which means you can eat a lot more raw chocolate in that. But I had spent a couple of years in Europe, and I had at least, actually, you know, what we're told is a healthy consumption for a woman. I probably had a glass of wine a day. But there's a reason it's called intoxication. That doesn't mean that I was intoxicated. It means that I was consuming a substance that's so toxic, it can kill a person in 2 hours. Cancer won't kill anyone in 2 hours. Alcohol is that toxic, and so when you're not well, that means your liver, which is a filtering organ, has been in overdrive. It's one of the things going on. It's been in overdrive for too long, and anything that's been in overdrive for too long starts to break down. And when things are breaking down, you want to give them a break, right? Instead of overworking them. So I'm not at all a non-drinker now, but I drink very rarely. And my diet is by and large plant-based. It's by and large whole foods. The thing that I cheat on every day is anything with sugar in it. Yeah. And if you can throw white flour in it, then I will respond like a crack addict. So please don't anyone put a Costco sheet cake in front of me now. Yes, ma'am?
I'm surprised you eat sugar, but my
question, yes.
My question was, so basically, have you discussed raw versus cooked? I mean, what's
okay, so when she said she was surprised I eat sugar, I haven't had to do this diet perfect. You know, like I said, I developed a serious diagnosis at 13, which means that the younger someone is when they develop a serious diagnosis, that means they have fundamental weaknesses that other people don't have because they don't develop that weakness. I was basically that sick, and yet still I haven't had to do this diet perfectly. That's a really important point for people to realize because most people aren't that sick. So in terms of making a commitment that's sustainable, which is the only thing that matters, it's important to recognize that even someone that was really sick didn't have to do a diet perfectly. I respond to sugar like an addict, and so that if it's available, I will have it, and especially Costco sheet cake in my next life. I'm coming back. It's going to be a swimming pool full of Costco sheet cake with buttercream icing, and I can just open my mouth, and it won't hurt any. I won't eat anything else. I don't think of any other food except Costco sheet cake. So, and your question was raw versus cooked. Now, okay, so there's a really good book written by a Harvard anthropologist called How Cooking Made Us Human. And by the way, I have a free newsletter that I send out every month if you'd like the newsletter, because I just quoted something from that book. Send me an email. My email address is just the letter D as in David at yourhealingdiet.com. Tell me you want my newsletter, and then I'll put you on the newsletter list. But there's a quote from this author in my June newsletter, and he talks about how they have evidence of 790,000 years ago near the Jordan River in Israel that they have found evidence of olives and grapes and barley that were cooked with a fire. So yeah, humans have been, and not only that, this guy, he supposes that, based upon the evidence, that specifically because of cooking, that allowed more assimilation of nutrition, and because of that, our brains changed to allow us to actually become humans. So, you know, anything, again, this kind of goes back to food combining, and, you know, even raw versus cooked. Okay, the people in those third world countries living, are they going, well, is this raw? You know, if you heated it over 116, I ain't eating it. They don't know, you know, no, there's a lot of, in fact, you know, when people get real hung up on details about their diet, that looks a lot more like an eating disorder to me than about health. Health is robust, it's flexible, and, you know, being obsessed with finite, which, you know, raw versus cooked, they're raw people, it's either 116 or 117. It gets over it, you're out of bounds. You know, you're not following the rules, you got to check out. So, no, same thing with, you know, even veganism, vegetarianism. I mean, in all due respect to that, this is for an ethical reason, but vegetarianism is only 5,000 years old. This is not, you know, it's been there for ethical reasons, not because it's the way humans have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if there's any kind of food that helps hypothyroid issues?
Well, I'm going to say, again, all chronic disease is characterized by inflammation. So please take a look at just what I just said. Plant-based whole foods. I don't mean to, you know, sound, what's the word, you know, facetious when you hear, but it's the same principles. Regardless of what diagnosis I work with, you start with plant-based whole foods, and then based upon someone's diagnosis, when I do private consultations, I look at someone's entire health history, not just their immediate diagnosis, but what's been going on over time. And that's when I start looking even more. Instead of using a diagnostic test for things like gluten or casein, I look at someone's symptoms that they tell me about over the course of their life as potential evidence. And when these things start to add up, that's when I say you want to add this onto there too. But the most important thing is to go back to the standard principle that applies for human beings. And this is validated in empirical research. It's not an opinion. It's, you know, the same people that I've mentioned that are at my website and I've spoken of here, these are all the best researchers in the world. Things like the paleo diet are not validated by empirical research. Dr. Atkins himself had a heart attack in his 60s. In the United States, again, we rank 43rd in the world for longevity. A man that has a heart attack in his 60s is no example of good health. So, and who's next? Yes.
My primary care physician said that there's a test that he incorporates into his analysis.
Okay.
That has to do with inflammation.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, there are all different kinds of inflammatory markers that are now used that will be specific to a diagnosis. All different kinds of them now. So, and then what is useful about those kind of tests that I'm not qualified to do, but somebody like an MD would be qualified to do, is that you can look and see what happens to those markers over time. That's very different from the diagnostic test I was referring to, which says, do you have an inflammatory response to wheat, to dairy, to grapes, to basil, you know, the whole spectrum of things. Who is next? Yes, sir.
What about milk? Our coach used to tell us 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Milk is the perfect food for
Yeah.
baby cows.
Yeah.
Not people.
Yeah.
Does that fall into the same classification?
Well, so the you know, not quite common sense, but yeah, we are the only species that drinks the milk of another species, and a lot of, but that's not to say that I'm not anti-dairy at all. And I think dairy, in lots of ways, yeah, you look at it, if it's enough to help a baby calf grow, it's the same idea with an egg. If a little you know, little embryo can grow to become a baby chicken, obviously there's some really good nutrition in there for that to happen. But nevertheless, and there are plenty of people that have no problems with dairy, but there are some other people that have very, very, very serious problems, and they will not recover, just as with gluten. And so that is a more individual, I'd say that's a more individual response, whereas plant-based whole foods applies for all of us. The notions around things like gluten and wheat and casein and dairy are more individual based. Yes?
Yeah, can you have allergy to soy just like gluten?
Soy is another thing. He asked if you can have soy, an allergy to soy just like gluten. Soy will not wreak systemic havoc like gluten will, and soy itself is controversial, although I think even the negative stuff is really exaggerated. Soy, again, what's the common sense? Soy has been a staple in the diet of millions of billions of people for thousands of years. If it was that bad, would it have sustained billions of human beings over thousands of years? No. Soy is the #1 genetically engineered crop, and so obviously it makes common sense to eat it the way humans have been eating it, which is organic. There were no clinical research trials done on genetic engineering, but nevertheless, yes, there are some people for whom soy can elicit a very negative response, but I think soy, and there's also at that Arizona Center of Integrated Medicine, there's certain kinds of cancers that actually benefit from soy consumption. I know there's some that they found are negatively implicated, but nevertheless, I think soy, that talk and controversy is really exaggerated. It's been a staple. When something's been a staple for thousands of years, for billions of human beings, it's got something going for it. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask you, you keep saying that beans and lentils
Yes,
are a big part of that.
Yes.
But what if you can't digest those?
Well, then you probably have had a long-standing, diet that is.
No, I mean, it was
yeah.
I was a small child.
Yeah. But we can also, just like I developed a diagnosis at 13, that means I had a fundamental weakness and started out earlier. It also, without knowing more about you and how you were actually fed these things, but what you could do first is actually really improve the quality of your diet overall, and then introduce beans in, because you should be able, like there's some people that can't eat greens. Well, that's because their diet's been so poor for so long, so the goal is to restore the integrity of the gut. And when you restore the integrity of the gut, then you restore the ability to eat things that we've been designed to eat. Yeah. Who's next? I'm sorry, I'm going to try to go really fast. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I see you.
How you doing?
Yes, ma'am.
You were speaking earlier about vitamin D.
Yes,
and for,
calcium.
For women who are high
Menopause.
fashion and stuff.
Right,
Talk to me, what can I do? Healthy D, come on.
I was looking for you. Your hair's different. It's good to see you. It's good to see you. It's good to see you. So the common sense is, and it's what I wish they would have put, it just came out in the news today, that they're telling women that are of menopausal and postmenopausal age that they need to think twice about taking calcium and vitamin D supplements. So that's all they tell you. It's like, well, great, what am I supposed to do now? Yeah. Why didn't they just say, okay, the common sense is, how do you build bones? Exercise. Yeah. How do you get vitamin D? You get out in the sun, you see? Yeah. And also one thing to consider is, to the degree, I'm 50% Irish, and then I'm 50% a whole, who knows what else. But 50% of me spent a whole lot of time under gray skies, okay? For those that their ancestry has been spent under lots and lots and lots of sun, these people need more sun, you see? And so to the degree that they spend all this time in offices and watching TV or playing, they're not doing what they need to be doing to optimize their health. So again, you go back to you know more than you think you know. To the degree that they're big problem, it's the same thing with taxes. Do I need a CPA to tell me I need to pay my taxes? No. Do I need Susan Combs to tell me I need to pay my taxes? No. But if I owe the state millions and millions of dollars, Susan Combs can call me. And then I got a big problem, right? And so it's the same thing. When, to the degree you want to optimize the quality of your life, your health, you just make common sense. To the degree that you have a bigger and bigger health problem, you need better and better advice. You need an expert. You need somebody that really knows what they're doing. But long, long before you get to where you're just buried in the hole, you have most of the answers for this in your own hands. Is that good?
Yeah, but I'll talk to you.
Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am, you behind? Yeah. Yeah, so water is, what if humans been drinking for water? They didn't have tap. And so what were they drinking? They were drinking out of rivers. They were drinking mineral waters. It's called mineral water for a reason. Stuff like San Pellegrino, that's because it has to have a mineral content in it to garner that label. Minerals mean, to the degree, that's actually a little bit too much information here to go into. However, acid, alkaline, pH, to the degree that something is alkaline forming, that means it's high in minerals. A plant-based diet is high in minerals. This will exert an alkaline forming effect on the body. And by the way, too, I do have a book that I'll be selling at the end of this. It goes a little bit into this also. And I sell it at a discount price for $10. It's sold at Whole Foods, Book People, People's Pharmacy, yada yada, for $14. Nevertheless, mineral waters, I think, are a great way to build more minerals into the diet easily. If the minerals have been added in by a laboratory, I'm more trusting of Mother Nature solutions and what's been provided for humans and the way humans have consumed it throughout time than I am on a laboratory. But nothing wrong with the profit motive, but when it comes to health, I think Mother Nature is wiser. Okay, who else? Yes, ma'am. You in that.
How much meat do you think is healthy to eat?
I think it depends individually, and but plant-based means the vast majority of your food does come from plants. The University of Michigan has some more details about that there. I probably spent the first 6 years after changing my diet with having maybe 10 portions of chicken, fish, or beef, maybe 10 times a year. And starting in 2009, I put much more animal protein back into my diet. Now, granted, I had 7 years of a really cleansing effect from such an exclusively plant-based diet. But I probably have now, and this is far less than I ever did before, I bet I have 16 ounces in a week, you know, so that's probably, maybe not that much. I probably have 3 times a week, I probably have 3 ounces or something like that, you know. And this is much more of like a sustainable, ongoing type of healing diet. The University of Michigan Healing Foods Pyramid doesn't, one thing I like about it too is it doesn't include animal protein. It has meat, dairy, and eggs in it, but it's actually sitting towards the top of the pyramid, meaning these are the things that you eat less of to the degree that you want to heal, which means not just prevent, not just manage, but reverse disease. You have to eat a plant-based diet, and you can still accomplish that with some animal protein in your diet. Okay, who else? Yes, ma'am.
Can you give me an example of some restaurants?
Yeah, my very favorite.
And what you get when you go there?
Okay, my very, very favorite place in Austin that I go to more than any place else is Demasi's Mediterranean Buffet.
Oh,
Isn't it awesome? Yeah, and now it's even better because they bought that. Oh, it's even better now because they brought a guy from the Houston one. And when I'm there, what I love about it is there's a lot of research that's come out on the power of cruciferous vegetables to prevent cancer. So otherwise, I get the whole shebang there. I get parsley, the tabbouleh, which is going to be parsley, which is a natural chelator. And then I pour on top of that, they have a cucumber salad that's doused in lemon juice. Then on top of that, I put a fresh raw cabbage salad. And then on top of that, I put hummus. So now I've got about a pound of that. And then their cauliflower is fantastic. And they have a chicken that is roasted in turmeric and mustard. So mustard has turmeric in it. Turmeric is a very highly anti-inflammatory agent. It's anti-parasitic, antibacterial. Yeah. It's cooked in tons of onions. So, you know, I get the whole thing there. It's really easy and then I never eat as many cruciferous vegetables as when I'm at that restaurant. I also like Al Gore's Persian cuisine. And let me see, Zen Japanese fast food. They make it really easy. They have brown rice. I even like mandolas a lot. I get their vegetable. They have a plate where you can get 7 or 8 different things. They have all these different vegetable, antipasto, artichoke, chipolata. It's fantastic. Let me see, where do I go? I go to Whole Foods a lot to their buffet. And they'll even have things like kale. I'll use greens as a bed instead of rice or noodles or a piece of bread. I'll use greens for things. My book actually has a whole chapter on restaurants in Austin too that I go to and the kinds of things that I order in those restaurants. Yes, sir.
Question about seafood. What do you think about seafood as supplement to plant-based diet?
So seafood, you know, a long time ago, the sea was clean. And now, like for instance, the farm-raised salmon, the EPA is obviously a really conservative group, right? They're not going to want to tell you, yeah, guess what, our seafood is really filthy. But even the EPA only recommends 1/2 portion per month for an adult farm-raised salmon because the I can't believe I'm forgetting. PF, what are they, how do you think, what's the real standard? I can't believe I'm forgetting. It's a real common, like PFC or something, I'm sorry. No.
EPA, DHA.
No. PFCs, some kind of environmental toxin. The levels are so, what's that?
Oh, I said
fluoride. Yeah, and I apologize, I may not even have that one right. But if you go to EPA, type in EPA farm-raised salmon, their recommendation is 1/2 portion per month because it's so high. Right. So and now, you know, so when we hear about oil spills, it's not that the oil spills didn't happen before; it's that they didn't hit the surface. They, you know, as long as they use the surfactants, it keeps all the stuff below the surface, and as long as they keep it below the surface, it won't make the news. So they know that when we had that big spill out in the Gulf, that stuff is more than that is happening every single year. It's just not hitting the surface. So seafood, actually, unfortunately, I really minimize that. The mercury, the lead that's in it. I do use a pharmaceutical grade fish oil, Pharmax is what I recommend more so. Yeah, yes ma'am?
Wild?
Yeah, then wild, yeah, and especially for people that may just be starting, they're going down the path of more of a plant-based diet, it may be harder for them to cut that stuff out. So again, I say start where you are, and instead of eating 8 ounces of it, try to eat 6 ounces of it. And then just keep heading down that path to more and more plants. Anybody else? Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you only do organic vegetables?
No, I'm glad you asked that. I've never been it's common sense, right? Of course organic is better, but that's partly why my diet's imperfect and I have not had to do it perfectly to still get incredible results. And again, most people aren't as sick as I was. So if I was able to get recovery, that means that most other people are going to be able to get a really good response too without doing it perfectly. But organic, of course, it makes sense. Organic is really conventional. That's what human beings were always did. That's the entirety of human history. Everything they ate was organic. Organic is not new. It's very old. The pesticides, the herbicides, genetic engineering, this is all the stuff that's new for nothing more than a profit motive. So, of course, organic is better. It makes sense. If you want to grow your own food, that's the best option. But it's not necessary to get incredible results. What's the most important for great results, I believe, is a plant-based whole foods diet, whether it's organic or not. Okay, anybody else? Yeah?
What about veganism?
Veganism is exclusive, you know, they don't even eat honey. And so after all I've said, what would you say is the answer? Yeah, I said if I had to be vegan, I wouldn't have gotten the results, right? And I just told you I eat 3 ounces of meat probably 3 times a week. And my results, and I haven't seen that. And granted, people want to commit to that, I'm all for it, but I've not seen anyone need to commit to veganism or even vegetarianism to get incredible results. What they do need to do is to go to a very heavily plant-based diet, and they need it to be whole foods, meaning it's not a tofu hot dog. See, it's rice and beans and vegetables and fruits and lentils and nuts and seeds.
What do you think about the eat right for your blood type?
That's not empirical research, just as Atkins is not research. When you make decisions, look for real research. Yeah. I could do that experiment in my kitchen and publish that book. So it's saying it doesn't have value, it's just not research. By the way, I will do a little book signing. If anyone would like a book, I'll be happy to answer any other questions back here. I do private consultations, and I'll have my book also. Thank you all so much.